Hello and welcome to the panel on creating NPCs both foul and heroic. I am your host, John Lodge from Red Dice Diaries, and these are my co-hosts, Mitchell Grubbs and Tim Kearney from Tabletop Terrors. Now, we're all here to give you some advice on that most vital part of your game, the NPCs, the cast that populate the rest of your world and then interact with the players. Basically, no NPCs, no game. So I've been role-playing for more years than I care to remember. That's not to brag about that, that's just to give you a little bit of background, and hopefully we can answer some of your questions. Thank you very much to everyone who's already submitted them. So Mitchell, if you can say a little bit about your role-playing history and your channel.
Hey everybody, I'm Tinho Mitchell. I do typically other role-play related stuff, typically Dungeons & Dragons and high fantasy. I've been playing for about 5-6 years and run a number of games. Tim, it's your turn.
Hey guys, this is Tim. I have the YouTube channel Tabletop Terrors, as John mentioned, but as far as my RPG history, did some early D&D stuff when I was younger, and mostly D&D has been my thing. But really, in the year 2000 or around then, whenever 3 came out, 3rd edition, I bought all of the books, and that's really for years and years. I played 3, 3.5, and now I do 5th edition. But I love RPGs in general, and I'm open to any system.
Okay, guys. So, first of all, we're going to jump straight into the questions. We've got a large number of them that have been sent in advance. So the first question is from Emma Louise Catan, and she says, when you are creating NPCs, how much effort do you put into creating a fully fleshed background for that NPCs? She says that she likes to ask questions to NPCs when she's playing to get more involved in the game background, and wonders how often people like that are encountered in our games and whether we prepare for it or whether we ad lib. So guys, how important is it to have interesting NPCs in a game, and how much effort and prep do you put into them? Tim, if you want to take this one first.
Sure. You know, this is tricky because you can easily get tied up in spending too much time on this, depending on how many NPCs you have in your game. So the answer to me would be, I like to pick one major thing, and I like to try to highlight one major NPC per adventure. Think about your daily life. You know, you interact with probably hundreds of people, but there are key interactions that you really put in your memory bank. So for me, pick one major NPC you want to highlight in the adventure, and then give them something that's important to them. It could be something they want in their future. It could be something that they have from their past. That's my trick. And if you focus on one, I think it gives the perception that everyone is that deep, but you're just focusing so that the players can also digest it more easily. Yeah, Mitchell, what are your thoughts on that?
I typically keep in mind the players that I have. Almost every player that you have has a certain repetition that they do whenever they go in. The rogue is typically going to go to the more seedy parts of town and try to find information there. The bard is probably going to go to the tavern. The knight or the paladin is probably going to go to the local keep if the town is big enough for that, if it's an actual city. I typically try to have 3 NPCs that each would give a particular nugget of information from their point of view. If none of these NPCs get found, I typically would supplement the information through another NPC that I would make on the spot. It wouldn't quite be as detailed, but it's fairly easy to do this. You just think, what is this NPC's job that would give them, modify their personality, some such, like a farmer. They probably wouldn't be resentful or anything like that. It would be more just try to figure out their likes, dislikes, and hobbies, and you'll be able to figure out the more three-dimensional NPC that way if you have to ad-lib it. Otherwise, I try to keep it to depending on the players that I have and their background. John?
Okay, well, when I'm creating NPCs, what I tend to do is rather like Tim was saying, I have a few NPCs which are sort of fully fleshed out, and I have their backgrounds, their motivations, and how they're embroiled in whatever plots are going on written down. I then have some other NPCs, the ones that I expect the characters might run across. So just to give an example, if you're going to a farming village, let's say in a sort of stereotypical D&D game, there's nothing, well, there's a few things more boring than going up to question one of the locals, and he's just a stereotypical farmer with no real interest apart from ploughing his field. He's got nothing interesting to tell you apart from that one little nugget of information to do with the plot. So if you're going to a farming village like that, have a few locals drafted out and try and give them that one interesting thing that makes them different from everyone else. And I think that's the important thing to remember as far as I'm concerned. Give every person one interesting thing or one interesting secret or something they don't want you to know. And you can then ad lib and build everything around that. So for instance, if you say, oh, you've got a farmer who has a falling out with a local landowner because he stole from him, that might be all you have written down, but you can build off that and you can bounce plot ideas off that. And to be honest, I'm perfectly willing to cheat if it comes down to it, and just basically say to the player characters, if they go, oh, what's this farmer's beef with the local landowner, I'll quite happily turn around to the players and say, what do you think his beef is with the local landowner? And I'll quite happily run with most things that they will provide to me. So guys, how much do you ad lib during your sessions in terms of NPCs? Mitchell, do you tend to plan more, or do you go for a more ad libbed approach?
I've found that with my D&D players, there's a proverb that says any combat unit will never survive pass inspection. Any inspection ready unit will never pass combat. I keep my NPCs pretty simple because I know my players are going to do something that I definitely did not plan for, and if I plan too much, I'm going to keep trying to fall back on that plan. So ad-libbing is almost in my blood whenever it comes to running my NPCs, simply because I know I'm going to have to be good at it. But I do find ad-libbing really fun. It can get really interesting, especially in a comedic setting where you just get this brief flash of inspiration for something really stupid because you watched Monty Python or something last night. So, Tim, anything else you want to add?
Yeah, I tend to ad-lib a lot, which is, wildly dangerous, especially because my players are usually smarter than me. Or they at least pay more attention than me. And so that's where, I have to really be careful. And usually I try to do what you're saying, Mitchell. I try to throw out just enough that they'll bite on something, and they'll usually come up with something very clever as far as, how the conversation goes or an epiphany they have. And then that gives me my kind of foundation of what to improv. But yeah, I think I do definitely improv, but I try to keep it light because I might need that character later, and I have to remember what I said was, actually happening. So, John, how about you? Are you a big improv guy with your NPCs?
Well, what I try and do is I try and sort of flesh out the general themes of the area where they live, since I think we're all very much informed by the areas where we've grown up and the areas where we live and what's going on there. And I think if you understand how the settlement, the city, whatever you want to call it, where your NPCs make their homes, it's very easy to intuit or ad-lib what effects that could have had on your NPCs. And because you're doing the same thing for all of the NPCs in that setting, it makes them all more consistent, even though you are ad-libbing them. So if we've got just to use a ridiculously stereotypical example, if we've got a small village that's being taxed into the ground by some corrupt landowner, then straight away any NPC you create, you have to think, what are his views of this corrupt landowner and how has the tax affected him? And by doing that, you maintain a sort of level of consistency that, as you say, Tim, the players will notice because they pay a lot more attention to things. And if you as a GM forget something, you can bet that the players will be on it and they will have remembered that exactly how it went down. So I hope that's answered that question. And on to our next one, which is from Rob Davies, the Swamper, one of the fellow YouTube RPG Brigade members, who asks, how can I ensure the NPCs that I have in my game are different enough from each other to be memorable to my players? And if I'm creating a settlement, how many citizens of the town or village do I need to create? And when he says that, he's not talking about throwaways he creates on the spot. He's talking about detailed, different, backstory NPCs that are enough to make the town seem fleshed out. So, Mitchell, what do you recommend for ensuring that NPCs are different enough to be memorable to your players?
I have to figure out first which kind of setting they're in. But typically, once I get that figured out, it kind of starts to fall in together. I just need to constantly ask myself, what are this person's likes, dislikes, hobbies, their dreams for the future, stuff that can be summed up in either a sentence or two, and I can fill in some background, really easy, kind of like small sketches for the NPCs, and I can make a lot of NPCs this way if I want to. And it depends on the size of the city. It's typically I won't make more than 5 or 6 max, no matter what the settlement size is during any session, because my players aren't going to see any more than 5 or 6 NPCs, unless I specifically make the game to be entirely roleplay based with very little combat. Then I'll probably make more, but typically not more than 5 or 6. And just stick to the simple guidelines as well as where they are, and it just kind of helps write itself, and that's kind of the key to making the NPCs. For the actual settlements, again, I have to figure out where we're going with this, but typically a good thing that I always found in my high fantasy games is there's always got to be a local church of some type of deity. Usually for the farming villages and stuff, it's Palor, or if it's or the elven god of nature. There's always going to be the town meeting hall. There's going to be typically some type of inn. Sometimes the meeting hall functions as the inn, sometimes depending on the size of the town. There's probably going to be around 3 houses that I'm going to make. And a lot of farming land that I basically would map out, as well as parts of the forest. But I won't get too incredibly detailed into it. But if it's a big city, I'm probably going to do some quick sketches, get things done, use what I'd already said, but I'd add a couple extra things: guard barracks, towers of note, entrances and exits, always multiple entrances, exits, and secret passages. I love secret passages. You've got to have a couple of those in your really big cities, especially in the castle. The players love secret passages. Things behind the paintings, moving armor that has that one pinky finger that you can move, and it just reveals like a small hole in the ground. Stuff like that. You know what your players like. They love secrets. They love finding things out. As much as they like killing things, they love solving a mystery, I found. And if you give them the option to find a mystery, they're going to chomp at that bit. Tim?
Well, as far as how do you make them different from one another? To me, it's what makes us all different. You have to give them an opinion. So, one of the things that you can do, I think, is from that person's perspective, what's important to them. And I mean specifically. So, if your NPC that you're dealing with is a merchant, when he's talking to the players, have him address the value of their items. Oh, I see you are wearing a very fine robe. He would notice that because he's a merchant. Someone who is a farmer wouldn't care what kind of robe you had on. He would probably make fun of you because your shoes, those kinds of things. So take those things that would be detailed and important to them and see the world through that as they talk. To me, if you do that, they'll all seem very different. And then, how many citizens of the town do you create? Don't think you have to create them all at once, would be my first thought. If you're doing a mystery, make sure you have a sheriff. If you're doing some kind of a political intrigue, make sure you have a politician. And so I would say there's not really a rule of thumb for me. I cater it to the adventure, but once that adventure's done, I now have that sheriff. I now have that political figure, and I continue to go deeper with them as time comes on. So, John, I want to hear your thoughts on this.
Okay, well, again, to come back to what I said a few moments ago, and very much in agreement with yourself, Tim, I find that the best way to make an NPC different from another NPC and not have them become these sort of cookie-cutter, cardboard sort of two-dimensional characters is to focus on their likes and dislikes, and as you say, what is important to them, because the things that we like are often, not always, but often the things that are important to us. So if you say the sort of stereotypical greedy merchant, his main likes are probably his business and money, but you can also drop something else in that may be entirely different from that. So maybe he collects rare orc sculptures, well, probably incredibly rare if they're orcs, but maybe he collects something else. Whatever you give him, something unusual that he likes or that motivates him, that makes him stand out. And this, you can seed this into later adventures. So you don't have to keep banging on about it, because real people don't sort of tell you about what they like every time they see you on and on. But if it gets mentioned and the players pick up on it, then maybe later on when they come across this strange bit of sculpture that you've randomly dropped into a treasure hoard that they've looted, they can say, oh, well, if we take it back to that specific merchant, we might get a better price for it because he's a collector of that. And you can bring that character back. And as long as you've noted down how you played that character and you play them consistently, I think that's the best way to make them different to each other. Give them something that they like or dislike and focus on what's important to them. In terms of how many citizens of a town or settlement you need to create, I don't have any really hard and fast rule for it. I rough out the organisations and how they work within the town, so I might have made a note that says the law enforcement in this city is entirely corrupt and almost anyone can be bribed. And that then allows me to, if the player characters say they want to look up the city guard captain or whatever, I can use that as a basis to create him. Go, oh, well, he's probably corrupt, unless his one interesting thing is that he's the one good cop in a town of bad. If he's not, however, I'd come up with something else that's interesting of him and push that one thing forward, note it down, and I'm good to go with it. And as long as I write down what I've actually come up with and keep it consistent from one time they meet him to the next, then that will seem like a detailed and nuanced NPC, even if it's something that I've had to ad-lib a little. And there's something to start adding a bit more detail to them further on down the line. Now, related to this, Samuel Cordwell asked if we had any tricks to create an interesting NPC other than having a table with random traits on the spot, as it were. So, Tim, do you have any interesting tricks that you pull out of your sleeve when it comes to creating an NPC on the spot?
For NPCs on the spot, I will use characters from TV, because I know what they look like, I know how they act, I know what they're interested in. So, for instance, but you can plug in whatever character into whatever role. So let's talk about that, that one good cop in the corrupt city. I'll immediately, if I need to come up with that on the fly, I'll go, okay, I'm going to use Hugh Laurie from the show House. And I just think about him, and I think about his mannerisms, I think about how he would act, and that at least gets me through that first interaction enough so that I've passed. I've given my players something that they can start with, and then in future sessions or during an intermission, I can kind of get my things together. But that's my trick. I use someone from a TV show. So, Mitchell, what do you do when you're put in a tight spot and you need to use something like that?
You see, I make this noise whenever it first happens, like, huh? And I realize, oh, wait, I need to make somebody. So, I really hate those random tables. I really do, because it can really mess with the storyline that I'm trying to make, or it can really be detrimental to the players in a way that I really don't want it to do, because it's screwing with the story I'm trying to tell and the players are trying to enjoy. So I typically try to think of what is it they're trying to do, and who can I make on the spot that would have connections, either that would actually make this an interesting detrimental bit, or would be able to help them along? And what would they need to do that? It's typically pretty simple. If it was a corrupt guardsman and I needed somebody who wasn't corrupt, I'd have somebody who was on a case that was recently assigned with the corrupt guardsman, and while he couldn't do anything about it because the corruption could extend farther up, he could let the PCs know about some of the things that are going on, but he would probably have to roleplay a little bit, try to make sure that they're on his side and that they're not going to turn him in and the corruption would spread. It would be something, probably keep him as a really cautious guy. He's slightly paranoid too, because he had come across this and he has no idea where it is that this is coming from and just how far up this corruption extends, and if he can even go to his superiors about this. This is the kind of things I like to ask myself whenever I get that, and it just kind of goes through real quick in my mind as I'm thinking about it. And I try to keep it fresh. I do try to do similar to what you described, Tim, is use modern media, whether it be a movie, a TV series. I'm a big anime and manga fan, so I really, if I wanted to go for the funny route, I just pull from one of the stupid shows I sometimes watch on Hulu and just yank them in. But something deep, I've got comic books, I've got previous games I've been in that have a really interesting NPC that I particularly was fond of, and I might interject them in. And then I think it's a really fun thing whenever if one of the players was actually the DM who had made that guy but previously. I think it's rather hilarious when you actually do that and they recognize that you just in-plugged one of their NPCs into your game. So, John, you got any interesting stories for this?
Okay, well, as I said earlier, one of my favourite things for a game is asking the players and using their answers to sort of create what's occurring in the game. I mean, if I didn't have to have a job, I'd probably have Ask the Players tattooed across my forehead. But what I do with an NPC on the spot, just to keep rolling with our example of this one good cop in like a corrupt city, if the player character said, oh, we need to get in touch with this this particular guardsman, and they said, oh, well, what's he like? What's his character like? As you say, Mitchell, I try and have him in the middle of a situation when they come across him. So it's not like he's just been sat around waiting for the players to come up and ask him their questions. So he's a cop, he's probably working on a case, as you rightly said. But what I do is, as they came up to him, I'd say, well, he's in the middle of his paperwork or he's working on his case. I'd say, what sort of events have occurred locally that a cop might be working on? And the players will normally come up with something very interesting. And quite often, you can judge what they want to see in your game by what they ask you. So say we're in a fantasy setting and they're talking to this guardsman and they say, oh, well, there's been quite a lot of ogre raids recently on some of the outlying provinces. Maybe he's looking into that. I'll just make a mental note and I go, oh, well, the player characters are obviously interested in throwing down with some ogres, or at least one of them is. And then I'll normally jump to another player and I'll say, oh, so these ogre raids, what's been going on with that? And by asking questions to different players, you can build up a picture of almost what they want to see from this NPC. And once you know what your players are interested in seeing, and obviously you know yourself what you're interested in seeing, why would you not want to put it into your game? Because all it's going to do is increase people's enjoyment of the game. So that's my real only trick. Just ask the players, let them fill in some of the blanks, and then roll with what they give you. So I hope that's answered your question, Samuel. And we have a question now from the mighty Robert Ogre, who has been asking how we create regular townsfolk and people like that the party doesn't want to kill as soon as they see them, no doubt hoping to hoover up some XP or something equally nefarious. And let's face it, we've all been in that sort of situation where someone's lurking around just that 1 XP off leveling up, and they see some farmer wandering about and he just turns into a little pile of XP, and that's all they see of them. So, Tim, how would you create a sort of a generic everyman NPC that the player characters didn't want to just wipe out for the XP benefits straight away?
Sure. I think the trick here is to humanize them. You know, I think it's and so important, which is that cop wouldn't be standing there like this is World of Warcraft waiting for the NPCs to come up. If you put the characters to action, if you give them something they're doing, so the farmer tilling his land, and as you describe it, humanize the work that this human being is putting into it. You know, you see the farmer's brow sweating, and you can tell that his crop isn't going to be as much as he wanted it to be. You know, things that immediately put a little more weight and depth to him so that he's not just that World of Warcraft player, you know, standing there just spinning, and that they can just come up, hack down, and expect to respawn. So that would be my thought. Put them to action. Don't let them be standing around, because then they're just an NPC XP net. Mitchell, what about you? How do you stop this?
I've found it to be almost an impossibility. If my players truly wish to try and get that 1 XP, they're going to kill him. It doesn't matter how human I make him, how important to the plot. They're going to kill him because they think they're going to get that XP. Of course, they're not going to get that XP because killing farmers is not XP generable in my game. Instead, what they're going to get is a bounty on their head and probably the local Baron's infantry hot on their heels. That's typically it. Instead of making it so it's so much a human thing that'll keep them from doing such a thing, it's the repercussions in the campaign. I'll basically be stopping their fun because they're doing something utterly retarded like this. And if they're actually going to be playing truly murder hobos, there's going to be repercussions down the line. It's like, you can try and beef yourself up with all this XP and gold and stuff from killing and pillaging and stuff like that. Well, guess what? I'm the GM. It takes me 3 seconds for me to level up this guard. And I can also give him a +5 Vorpal sword. I mean, there are many different ways that you can stop your players from doing this stupid stuff. As you said, you can make them more human. You can make them interesting. It's one of the things I try to do early on is make it so all of my NPCs have a way to further the plot, give you either information or my favorite reward is for my players is not money, it's not loot, it's connections. They have, like, say, they either save somebody or they do a job for somebody only for him to actually be part of, like, the black market. So they now have a lower level connection to the black market for goods and services and jobs, which can get them more money, further connections, better gear, stuff that would be a hot commodity item. And if they go around killing people thinking they're XP bags, I want them to second guess that, going, wait a minute, what if he's got something that could really help us? What if he's got something that we could absolutely perfectly use later on in, like, this next dungeon we've got to go into, that I'm pretty sure, because of that twinkle in his eye, is going to be rooted with traps? It's things like that. If they want to kill him, making him human ain't really going to do much, because they're still going to try and kill him for that, as you said, that 1 XP for that next level up. Especially if that next level up gives them a slew of spells. But say, give them something that can give them information, give them something that could be no one else can give them, that is invaluable, and let them understand that every time they kill somebody, there's going to be some huge repercussion that they are going to wish they could had time stop for. They're going to learn real quick not to screw around with that. Alan, what's your take on this?
Okay, well, I completely agree with you that one of the best ways of preventing this from occurring is to push the fact that actions have consequences in role-playing games. I think a lot of the time in a role-playing session, player characters get an awful lot of leeway. I mean, let's face it, we're talking about people in the sort of stereotypical sort of role-playing setting who regularly ride around the countryside in full armor, sort of merrily murdering their way through whole, like, catacombs full of sentient beings, and that's part of that sort of genre, so that's sort of accepted. However, when it comes to actually being in civilization, I think it's very easy to forget that all civilizations have laws, that's what separates it from a state of anarchy and chaos. And if you have laws, there's inevitably a body of people who enforce those laws. So as you say, Mitchell, I think you're quite right that showing them the consequences of murdering the random farmer or villager or whatever he is one of the best ways of deterring them. But as you rightly say, having a few people who once they've killed them, you can say, oh well, if only he'd have been alive because he had the map to X dungeon, you could have got hold of that and made it a lot easier on yourself, is a good way of getting them to just stop and think about it for a minute. And I think that's the dangerous point. If people sort of see them straight away and go, all right, we'll kill that farmer and we'll get that XP, whereas if they actually have a cause to stop and think about it for a few seconds, most player characters will have a little bit of common sense sort of rear its ugly head, and they'll probably at least think, they may still go on to kill him afterwards, but at least have paused and thought about it for a moment. Okay, the next question we have is from Jenny Green, the Rogue DM, and Jenny asks how to make evil NPCs compelling, and if we have any tips for making evil characters truly mean, despicable, and loathsome, especially ones that can make the players really dislike them, have the player characters quaking in their boots. Now, everyone loves a good villain. So, Mitchell, what are your thoughts on creating an effective and scary villain?
What I try to do is make them very human. First thing whenever I do ever when I make a villain is give them a reason for why they're the villain. Why are they going around pillaging and plundering like this? And it could be something simple as greed. And sometimes that really simple answer could be very effective, because it's basically mirroring the players. In Dungeons and Dragons, the reason most of them are going around is for loot and stuff like that. Well, guess what? The guy you're going against, the leader of this barbarian warband, is for the same exact reason. He's doing all of this. But while you're saving all of these people, you're only one step away from doing the same to him. Complete sacking of villages. And I make sure to describe in intricate detail how they've been going around and killing these people. How they've been, like, say, hung up as either kind of like crucified and burned, or say hung from trees as like decorations in a Christmas tree. Things like that. Something that could be utterly human but absolutely horrifying. And you can use history for this stuff when trying to figure this stuff out. For like that barbarian warband, just think of Genghis Khan or some of those other conquerors that just pillaged and plundered their way. Blackbeard, if you're doing a more naval setting. I mean, these were bad dudes that horrified and scared the living hell out of people for a reason. Try and think of something that could do that. And in fantasy settings, it's a little harder, but you have magic you have to contend with and stuff like that. But it happens. You have to give them something that the players can see themselves in, a reason for doing so, and then what exactly pushes that horror factor forward to the forefront of their minds, to the point where they see nothing but themselves, the reason, and what it is that they're doing because of that reason. And I've actually had to stop one of my games once because one of the players was actually kind of continuing on the road towards one of these things, and when they confronted the villain, it's basically just like looking at the mirror, and it was like a freaking standing ovation. So you can do some really interesting stuff with your villains, but you've got to keep it real, well, real-ish, role-playing game, but you've got to give them something that will scare your players. And history can do wonderful things for that, like Jack the Ripper. I mean, truly Google and Wikipedia are your best friends here. So have fun and try to scare the pants off your players. Cthulhu is great for this too. Tim.
So I want to add on to exactly what you said. And this is my biggest trick. You give the villain a motivation, a real passion, because the quote is the villain is the hero in their story. You know, what they think they're doing is right. So, but I'm going to throw one other thing in there, and if you do this every once in a while, I don't know what it is, but it makes people just scratch their heads, and it makes the villain way more evil. Every once in a while, make them do something that lacks reasonable motivation. Show the villain doing something just because they can. Not because it fits in line with their passion, not because it's going to result in a goal, but just because they have the power to do it and they feel like doing it. Players do. Is just, why? Why would they do that? And it makes them not know when the villain's going to strike next, how they're going to strike next, because the pattern isn't there. That is my biggest trick for making a villain actually seem scary, unpredictable, and to me, I think it holds more emotional weight, and my players tend to think, I don't know, it just hits them harder when he does something because he can, not because it's part of his, you know, his passion and so on. But I'm dying to hear from John. John, what do you do in this situation?
Okay, well, I think you guys have covered most of what I'd say anyway. The only things I'd really add to what you say, because I agree entirely. Villains don't wake up one morning thinking, oh, today I'm going to be an evil villain when they roll out of bed. They have their own motivations, and what they're doing might seem completely reasonable to them. I think what makes a good villain is when those motivations are opposed to the player party motivations, whether that's for good or bad in the wider scheme of your world. There's nothing the players hate more than having their intricately laid plans foiled by someone else. And one of the things I find makes someone particularly villainous in the eyes of my players is if the villain almost derails their plans without doing it deliberately to get at them. He's just going along doing his own thing, and then he's like, oh, these people are trying to do something, and he just casually sweeps their plan aside, almost with an air of unconcern, because there's nothing that annoys, in my experience, player characters more than an NPC who doesn't think they're important. Because obviously a lot of the time in role-playing games, the player party do occupy something of a privileged position. They're people of power, influence, wealth, strength, whatever. Having a villain who doesn't even consider them important and just sort of casually goes, oh, you were trying to do this, but I didn't want it to happen, so I've just stopped that. Moving on with my plans. I find that makes them really determined to get back at the villain for doing that. And much in the same way as your idea about having them randomly do something, Tim, without a reason, I find another good thing to do is occasionally have a villain do something which seems nice. They don't see themselves as being a villain. Perhaps in some ways their goals are quite compatible with the players, or they don't interfere with them, so they might seem perfectly fine in those regards, but it's in those couple of areas where their goals oppose each other that you can really get at the players and really ramp up how villainous they see the main antagonist in your game. So I hope that's answered your question, Jenny. We've also, so adding on to this, we had Tony Crow who asked, how do you create new and original motivations for bad guys when most of them seem to have done before? Now, to answer this one myself, I'd just say don't worry too much about making everything startlingly original, because you're inevitably going to end up taking influence, whether you know it, from one place or another, whether it's TV characters and villains you've seen, whether it's from a book you've read. Don't worry about making it truly original. Just try and present it in a way that's interesting to your players and that seems consistent with your game. I don't know what you think about that, Tim.
I'm right in line with you. You know, I love tropes. I think they're there for a reason. And I think the way to be original is to do what you mentioned in your previous answer, which is find those points, you know, where it's going to grind on your PCs. If your PCs are doing something, or if they've had a goal that they've been trying to achieve for a couple of sessions or even a whole half of a campaign arc, create someone who has the opposite goal. And it's okay if it's been done 100 times, because it hasn't been done by you, it hasn't been done with this group, and it hasn't been played out this way. The story that we're telling together is what's going to be new, not the ingredients. You know, so I'm totally with you there. That's how I keep it fresh, is I'm not afraid to use something as long as it's not because I'm being lazy. If it's interesting to me, my players and I will make it interesting together. Mitchell, what about you?
As someone who is addicted to TV tropes, I love using tropes. I like the things that have been done before. And my characters come to expect, especially new players, they have a certain degree of things that they're expecting to happen. And I do. I kind of bring out some of the stuff that they are definitely expecting with certain tropes. But I love customizing these tropes. It's like you can see where I took the idea from, but then I made it mine. I changed some of the stuff around. I changed the formula a little bit. This isn't Coke, this is Pepsi. And I'd mostly do that for experienced players. It's they can see it, but they also know I'm breaking some new ground here. I'm being original. I'm giving it my own little spin. And I have my own little bits of flavor depending on the characters that are done. But I love tropes, especially for new players, because they see it and it just creates that huge laugh. Or things that have already been done before. Don't ever be afraid to use things that have been done before. They're as famous as they are for a reason. People enjoy them. People love them. And if you wanted to take the original route, your players will love that too. But don't forget the basics. The basics is where you can actually build a really interesting part of the story from using these tropes. And it's a really good guide for making your NPCs, because you can just start building tropes that kind of go together. My favorite one is the Batman one. Where it's just like that one guy that's crazy prepared. And I just love this stuff. John?
Okay, so if we go on to the next couple of questions, which are from James Norse, and he says, is it more of a success when players dislike or find an NPC annoying than the NPC being forgettable? And if you've planned an NPC for a purpose, but the players don't connect with that purpose, should you change or do away with said NPC? So, Mitchell, is it more of a success that players dislike or find an NPC annoying than they forget about them?
That's that actually hurts to have either one of those happen. I mean, that's like a huge blow to my pride. That either an NPC that I had spent time on became forgettable, or that they were actually truly just annoying. I mean, if I made him to be annoying, I'd understand. But if it came off as that such, and I was trying to have him be informative while having an interesting personality, that's a huge blow. I wouldn't want any of those to happen. But I guess I would probably go for annoying a little bit. At least that way they'd remember. I typically do comedic settings most of the time, so it's kind of hard to forget that one guy that said the one-liner that made you nearly piss yourself. So it kind of helps with that a little bit. I've never really had my player characters full-on forget an NPC before, but that sounds... Ooh, man, that sounds like it hurts. Actually, John, what was the other half of that question? I can't quite remember it.
Yeah, the other half of the question was, if you've planned an NPC for a purpose, but the player characters don't connect or sort of come across that purpose, do you change or do away with the NPC in question?
No. If it's kind of a problem on my part. I'm trying to bring the NPC out, and they've got information or something like that, and if the player characters truly don't want to get in touch with them, well, I guess you're not getting that map to the dungeon, because you didn't want to roll your diplomacy and spend some time role-playing with this character. I really don't want to change it. I made the character this way for a reason, and it's all completely logical reasonings. I really shouldn't have to modify my character to fit you specifically or to help you out. But I'm not going to get rid of my character, and I'm probably not going to change them. I mean, they're that way for a reason. I mean, if I made the character ad-libbed on the spot, I would probably change them a little more down the line, but that would be more customizing what I already built upon. I really don't ever want to get rid of any of my NPCs, especially if I'm playing Rifts or any other Palladium games, simply because it took way too long to make that character. So I hate to tell you this, but if y'all in any of my Rift games or Splicers, as I just recently got into, I ain't changing that character. Tim?
Well, to me, it's a huge success if you feel anything for one of my fictional characters. So I don't care what it is you're feeling. If you're feeling, then it's working. So for me, if you're annoyed, good. One of my favorite things is when we're talking outside of the game, and one of my players is like, "Oh, I hate that guy," because I made them feel something, and to me, that's a success. So I definitely try to play off of it. So if that guy's annoying, I don't try to be annoying, but I know, like in my life, there are a couple of people that I know who are really good at something, like maybe the guy that fixes your computer or the guy that, sets up your guitar, whatever it is. He might be really annoying, but he's really good at something, so you kind of need him. So, I think it can make an interesting role-play scenario. So yes, to me, it's a success. If you're feeling something, love, hate, fear, pain, whatever, then the characters come into life and we're good there. As far as the players not connecting, I'm exactly with you, Mitchell. I don't do that. You know why? In real life, there are plenty of people that we don't hit it off with right away, and as things change and as things shift, things come in seasons sometimes, and maybe later on that will come back around, and there will be context there because of it. If the players can remember that interaction, how much more of a stinger is it 2 adventures later when they run into this person at a tavern and have a great conversation and find out that that person had the map all along? It can almost hold more weight. So that's kind of how I feel about it. But, John, what are your thoughts on these two things?
Much the same as yourself. I'm always happy whenever players remember an NPC or they have a strong emotion about an NPC. I've had a game I ran online where every time a particular villain came on the screen, I sort of put a picture of him up on the screen, and I had one of the players message me saying, "Oh, can you stop flashing that picture up on the screen, because I'm like getting the urge to throw my laptop out the window." And I just love that was the best compliment they could have paid me, to be perfectly honest. So if the players are annoyed by an NPC, I would quite happily play that to the hilt and run with that to get as much emotion out of that as I can. In terms of people not connecting with NPCs, I wouldn't change the NPC if they go off track and go towards something else, because there's countless more NPCs out there who can fulfill all manner of different roles. If they don't want to go and talk to the NPC that I've specifically designed, they want to go and talk to some random dodgy looking stranger on a street corner, that's fine. I've got a whole world of NPCs that they can talk to, and as we've talked about ad-libbing and having just a little bit of sort of fleshed out prep that you can then expand on to ad-lib a more convincing NPC, I can quite easily do that. I can quite happily drop a clue in via another NPC if I need to, rather than changing the one I've already designed. Because as you say, he might be very useful later on, or he might bring something entirely new to the story further down the line. Okay, the next question we have is of Ashley Morrissey, and he says, if an NPC is done away with, execution style, by the players when they have valuable information and hold the basis for a plot, what can we as GMs do to avoid this senseless waste of a scenario? And we've already sort of talked about the whole sort of players executing NPCs a little bit, but it is something of a recurring theme in some role-play games. So, Mitchell, if an NPC was done away with execution style and he had valuable information, what would you do as a GM to avoid the scenario going straight down the tubes?
Well, that's kind of all my players. See, I've got this wonderful thing that as a GM, I can, when the eventual scenario happens that they really should have gotten the information for, I just stand up and laugh at them. Because, hey, this is where I get to have some fun. Because, hey, there's nothing in the GM's guide that says I can't do this. I mean, if you guys fail to interrogate him properly, oh well. But typically, if it has valuable information, more than one NPC would actually have it, just like in real life. Hell, even the president has only half the launch codes to our nuclear weapons. So if we actually have to share that particular valuable information between two people, the particular guard patrol route is going to be shared between quite a number of people. If you execute this one guy and he's actually truly the only one who holds this secret, that's an insanely valuable secret, and that's on you guys for killing him. Tim?
Luckily, I don't have many people in my party who are, the execution style players that we've kind of talked about. But honestly, and I just cheat. I cheat as a DM. If I need them to know it, I don't railroad them. I don't hold their hand. There are consequences in my games. But if I prepared a whole night and they botch it up front by beheading somebody, I'm going to put that information into somebody else's head simply because it is a game and I do want them to have fun. And, I believe in sandbox adventures, but, I've prepared all this. This is the game I have laid out. So to me, it depends why they killed the person, what kind of thing came up. If that NPC happened to mention something, if it was something that was very important to the players and the player became offended, they started pushing each other, it was a fight and the NPC broke his neck, different story. This is talking about execution style. I want to make sure that, like we talked about earlier, there are repercussions for that, but at the same time, I want to try to get my players, at least nudge them in the direction that I've prepared, because it's a game. So, John, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I agree with what Mitchell said and what yourself said, that in any sort of scenario, it's entirely unlikely that only one person in your fantasy world would have access to whatever plot information or plot hook it is that you want to use to get your player characters into your prepared scenario. However, if they've just wasted the first person they've came across that had this information, there are consequences. If they're caught and dragged into to jail by the city guard or the watch, or whatever you want to call them, then I'm quite willing to ad-lib an encounter at the start where it'll be, hey, yeah, you've got to get out of this jail cell and get your asses out of town to get away from the watch before you can even think about the adventure. And what I'll do is, whilst they're dealing with that scenario, which, let's face it, breaking out of a jail is a fairly easy scenario to ad-lib, and it's something that most players can immediately jump on, and given the power level of a normal sort of player party in like D&D or something similar, it's not difficult to get out of a cell with your average city guard on watch. So what I'll do is, while they're going through that ad-libbed scene, I'll be thinking of ways that I can drop other leads into the main plot in. So by the time they finish that jail breakout, I can then wheel out a couple of these additional hooks that I've thought about, and we can actually get into the prepared scenario. So that's how I'd handle it.
I just thought of something, and if it has really important information, more than likely that information is going to be written down. That is something I had done once, where they had killed somebody who had information, but I had kept a written record of what it is that he had in a desk in an office that he had. The players didn't find it, but it was there to be found. And always kind of like have a backup of, even if it's this one guy only knows, there's typically a written record that you might find. It'll be harder to find than, say, if you were interrogating this guy, but it's there.
I think that's a very sensible way of handling it, and it also gives a bit of not realism, but a bit of sort of verisimilitude to your setting, because, as you say, lots of important stuff is written down, and it might be locked in a safe, it might be held in a secure office, whatever, but it's very rare that a secret will be just kept inside one person's head, because it's so easy for someone to have an accident, to meet an unfortunate end, and that information just to be lost. So there's always a backup somewhere. For our next question, James Norse again asks, when it comes to fully fleshed out, i.e. long-term individuals, sometimes it's helpful to ask a list of questions about motivations, fears, etc., to get a handle on their characters and fully develop them. Beyond these basics, if we were going to ask a number of questions to develop an NPC, what questions would we be asked to bring their backstory in without just doing a big monologue and spieling off an hour or two's worth of backstory. So, Tim, what questions would you ask to an NPC to tease this information out of them?
That's a good question. You know, I'm going to take this angle on it. A lot of times when we prepare, we think about their past. We think about what they've been through and things of that nature. One of the things that I think is often overlooked is today. What are they going through right now? Yes, they have this history, they have this childhood, they have these dreams, but what's going on right now? What is their current struggle? Are they behind on their rent? You know, do they have a newborn baby that they can't feed? Did they just miss a big promotion? If you take a right now challenge or you know, I guess conflict that they're up against, it can become, I think, informative on who they are right then, and that can show a different side of what we typically prepare, which is broader strokes like motivations, fears, and etc. So that would kind of be my tact on it if you were going to try to do something a little different. Mitchell, what do you do in this situation?
The question is, how do we get information out of an NPC related to their background, or?
Well, it's more a case of if you were preparing an NPC, it's often useful to have like a sort of a standard list of questions that you fill in the answers for to help you design the NPCs. So what questions would you include on your list?
All right. Their job, the setting they're in, and what is they do for a living, the setting they're in, and what state is the settlement they are currently in. What's going on in the world, and then I basically ask myself, what are their likes, their dislikes, their hobbies, and probably what is it they dream or wish to do in the future. It's, to use the farmer analogy again, they may their likes would be they actually like to enjoy a good meal with some ale. That's one of the things they like. They like their family. Their dislikes, they hate taxes. They hate when their crops don't come in. Their hobbies, he likes to sit at the tavern after a hard day's work, kick it up by the fire, and sip some ale while listening to whoever's playing music. Dreams for the future to eventually retire with his family, or maybe to pay out the debt, or something similar like that. This is incredibly stuff. I don't ever think this would ever be used for an NPC because my players would probably get tired of this guy for the first couple sentences. But this is just a simple analogy of what I kind of can bring up on the spot for a farmer. But all of these things, these likes, these dislikes, they all get modified by the setting that they're in and what world events are happening and impacting this settlement here. Or what it is that's the quest that's going on for my players. Like John, you had mentioned once that there was not a corrupt landowner, but he was basically taxing a whole bunch of people. That would modify his likes and dislikes, as well as his dreams. So that's what I try to use as a guideline, and what I ask myself anytime I make a character. And your turn.
Okay. Well, for myself personally, one of the things I find really useful for this sort of thing, if I want to write down a list of questions, is certainly over here in the United Kingdom, whenever you go for a job, there's always a job application form, and they always ask you a list of questions like, what do you feel you bring to this role? Where do you see yourself in 5 years' time? Name one incident where you've overcome a challenge. What are your applicable skills? And I find just going on the internet and downloading like a random job application form can actually give you a ready-made list of questions, and you don't really have to rewrite the questions. You just have to focus them a little differently. So instead of saying, oh, what do you bring to this role, you can say, what does this NPC bring to the setting, or what does he bring to his job? For the farmer we were talking about, what makes him a slightly different farmer to his neighbour? And I find that's a brilliant shortcut, and it saves you sitting down having to rack your brain about what questions you're going to ask yourself. There's a lot of stuff already out there, even if it's not game specific, where people have done these whole lists of questions. I'd advise you to just look around at what's already out there. If you find something you think is suitable for you and your game, don't be worried about taking it. You're only using it for your personal game. it's not like you're going to sell it, so you don't have to worry about copyrights or anything. Take as many sort of lists of questions, as much inspiration as you can from what's already out there, and then if you do think you need to add 1 or 2 questions, just add them onto the bottom of the list, and that's absolutely fine. So the next question, guys, and we're sort of coming to a close here, is what is the best way to store notes and information on NPCs that may recur in the future? Mitchell, how do you store your notes for your NPCs?
I have this wonderful application on my computer called Notepad++. I keep a ton of stuff on this application here, and I can make a simple folder for it, and I can keep like over 100 tabs on it in full screen that I can easily just click into, and it'll have like a brief bit of this NPC and some of the things that the player characters have encountered them with. And I'd also keep notes on what it is that they are going to be doing between when I have them next planned to meet the NPCs and stuff like that. I always also keep track of initiative and health and stuff like that with Notepad++. I love this little application. It's so much fun. Tim, what do you use?
Similar to you, I tend to just use Google Drive. So I have a Google Drive. I have the app on my phone. So if I think of something on the fly, I open it up, new, and I have the document already for Johan the guard. I thought of this. Click, click, click. In game, 1 sheet, 8.5 by 11 blank white paper. Draw a line down the middle. Draw a line across. And anything new that happens, I have 1 box for Johan, 1 box for so-and-so, and so on, and I just jot those down, and as long as you're diligent to put those in your Google Doc, you'll always be covered. John, what do you do?
Okay, well, I've tried a fair few different methods of doing it. I've used Notepad++ myself. I've used mini sort of Wikipedias that are stored on my my hard drive, but in the end I always just come back to a big fat stack of index cards. I have them in a little box sat on my desk. It's got the little tabs in with done alphabetically, and all I do is I have a big stack of blank ones at the back of it. I come up with an NPC that I'm ad-libbing. I take the card out, especially if I'm doing a game online. I put it on the front of my computer, write down the name of the NPC, because I've normally got a few lists of like random names appropriate to the setting open in one of the Google Chrome tabs that I've opened, since name generators are a great time saver. I'll write the name down. I'll write down a few notes about his character, like it might just be Johan, grumpy local farmer, moaning about the local rainy season being too long. And I'll scribble that down. Then later on, I'll go through those cards I've got from that session, and I'll just add a few more details on there. Like we said earlier, fleshing out these NPCs and making them a bit more than a two-dimensional character. And then I'll file them away alphabetically. And if they say, oh, we're going to visit old Johan the farmer, I just quickly flick through to J, pull out the card. I can write his stats down on the card if necessary. If not, I've got his character notes there. I might even write down a famous person or a TV character, as we said earlier, that I'm going to take inspiration from, sort of like as an instant hook for myself. I go, oh yes, he talks like this, and he looks like this person. Or you can even stick a picture on it, whatever you want to do. And that is how I store my NPC notes, since I don't have the world's greatest memory. And as we said earlier on, if we forget something as GMs, you can place money on the fact that the players will remember it exactly. And there's nothing that destroys the consistency of the setting. Like, you go and see Johan one day and he's a gruff, burly farmer. You go and see him the next day and he's some waif-like small boy who's starving on the streets of the setting. That sort of stuff just cuts the credibility of your game down straight away. So I think we've about answered all the questions we have, and we're about out of time. I hope you've all enjoyed this panel on NPCs foul and villainous. It seems to mainly be focusing on the villainous, but maybe that's what we like as role players. Who knows? I'd like to thank both my co-hosts, Mitchell and Tim. Hopefully we're going to try and organise a hangout at some point over the next few weeks where we'll run you through the three of us creating an NPC from scratch. We've not had time tonight, unfortunately, because we wanted to get as many of your questions answered as quickly as possible, and thank you very much for submitting them all. We hope you have a great rest of your day and a great BrigadeCon. Don't forget to donate to Child's Play, there's a widget on the BrigadeCon.org site, a charity giving games to young and unfortunate children. It's a great cause, and as you can see Tim there modelling the t-shirt, please donate. It's a very worthy cause, and we hope you have a great rest of your BrigadeCon. So from myself, Mitchell and Tim, take care and have a great rest of your evening.